I hope she got into an accident and doesn't show up. Honestly, this party would be so much better without her here bringing everyone down with her problems. Why Sister Melissa's voice carried clearly across her backyard, followed by laughter from what sounded like a dozen people. I just stepped through the side gate of her house, arriving at her engagement party that I'd been invited to, or at least, I'd thought I'd been invited to, though apparently my presence was not actually desired. I froze halfway through the gate, hidden by the tall wooden fence and an overgrown hedge, processing what I'd just heard. My sister, my only sister, who I'd driven 3 hours to celebrate with, had just publicly expressed hope that I'd been in a car accident. And my family members, judging by the laughter and murmurs of agreement, thought this was an acceptable, even amusing sentiment. I stood there for a moment, grocery bags in hand. I'd brought wine and an expensive cheese board as a gift, trying to decide how to handle this. Walk in and confront them immediately? Turn around and leave without a word? Stand here and listen to see how bad this really was? I chose option 3. Because something told me that what I was hearing wasn't just a one-off cruel joke. It was revealing something about how my family actually felt about me, something they'd been hiding when I was present but freely expressed when they thought I wasn't around. What I heard in the next 3 minutes confirmed my worst suspicions about my family and changed my relationship with them forever. But before I tell you what I did when I finally walked into that backyard and made my presence known, you need to understand how we got to this moment. How a family can be so dysfunctional that wishing harm on one of their own is considered acceptable entertainment. My name is Jordan Hayes, and I'm 32 years old. I have one sister, Melissa, who's 28, and we grew up in what looked from the outside like a normal, functional family. 2 parents who stayed married, stable middle-class upbringing, family dinners and vacations and all the surface markers of normalcy, but underneath that surface, there was a dynamic that had shaped my entire life. I was the problem child, and Melissa was the golden child. Not because of anything particularly dramatic I'd done wrong or she'd done right, just because that's how family roles get assigned sometimes, and once they're assigned, they're almost impossible to escape. That I'd been the older child who asked too many questions, who challenged rules that didn't make sense, who had opinions about things and expressed them clearly. I'd been independent and stubborn and unwilling to just go along with things to keep the peace. These traits, which in an adult would be called confidence and critical thinking, were in a child labeled as being difficult and rebellious and always causing problems. Melissa, 4 years younger, had learned early that the way to get approval and love in our family was to be agreeable, pleasant, non-confrontational. She didn't challenge anything, didn't question anything, didn't cause waves. She smiled and nodded and did what was expected, and our parents praised her constantly as their easy child, while sighing about how difficult I was in comparison. This dynamic had followed us into adulthood. I'd become a social worker specializing in domestic violence prevention, important work, but emotionally demanding and not particularly lucrative. I made decent money, but I wasn't wealthy. I was unmarried, focused on my career, living in a small apartment in the city. I'd had relationships that didn't work out, struggled with anxiety and depression that I managed through therapy and medication, and generally lived a life that my parents considered struggling, even though I was actually quite content. Melissa, meanwhile, had married young to her college boyfriend Derek, had worked a comfortable corporate job for a few years before quitting to focus on the home. She didn't have children yet but was preparing for them, lived in a beautiful suburban house that Derek's family had helped them purchase, and generally lived a life that our parents considered successful and stable. The contrast between us was constant. At family gatherings, my parents would praise Melissa's life choices while expressing concern about mine. When I talked about my work, they'd change the subject quickly as if helping domestic violence survivors was too depressing to discuss. When Melissa talked about redecorating her house or planning vacations, our parents would be enthusiastically engaged. I'd accepted this dynamic for years because I'd convinced myself it didn't really matter. So what if my parents preferred my sister? I was an adult with my own life. I didn't need their approval or validation. I had friends, colleagues, clients who valued my work. I had a purpose and meaning in my life beyond family approval, but periodically, the unfairness would become impossible to ignore. Like last year when my mother had forgotten my birthday entirely but had thrown an elaborate surprise party for Melissa's birthday a month later. Or when my father had proudly displayed photos of Melissa and Derek in his office but had no photos of me anywhere visible. Or when family money had been available to help Melissa and Derek with their house down payment but was not available when I'd needed help with medical bills after a car accident. Each incident alone was small enough to overlook. Collectively, they painted a clear picture. I was less valued, less important, less celebrated than my sister. And I'd learned to manage my expectations accordingly. Show up for family events because obligation required it, but don't expect genuine warmth or interest or support, which brought me to this engagement party. Melissa and Derek were already married, but Derek had recently proposed again with a more expensive ring and they were using it as an excuse for a celebration and engagement party. I'd received an invitation in the mail, a formal printed invitation, which had surprised me given that we were sisters and a phone call would have been more personal, but I'd RSVP'd yes. I'd arranged time off work, I'd driven 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon, and I'd brought expensive gifts as expected. I'd done everything right according to family obligation standards, and I'd arrived to hear my sister express hope that I'd been in a car accident so I wouldn't ruin her party with my presence. Standing behind that fence, hidden from view, I listened as the conversation continued. I just don't understand why you even invited her, Melissa, my mother's voice said. You know she always finds ways to make everything about her and her depressing work. This is your celebration, you shouldn't have to deal with Jordan's negativity. I had to invite her, Mom, Melissa replied with a sigh that carried clearly across the yard. She's my sister. Can you imagine the drama if I didn't invite her? She'd probably accuse me of being a terrible person or something. It's easier to invite her and hope she doesn't come than to deal with her victim complex about being excluded. My father's voice joined in, well, if she does show up, we'll just have to manage her. Keep conversations light, don't let her start talking about her work or her clients or any of that heavy stuff. This is a happy occasion, we're not going to let Jordan drag it down with her usual pessimism. She's just so exhausting, an aunt chimed in. I recognized my mother's sister Sarah's voice. Always talking about trauma and abuse and how society needs to change. Like, we get it. Jordan, bad things happen to people. But do we have to talk about it at every family gathering? Can't she just be happy for once? She's probably jealous, Melissa said, her voice carrying that particularly poisonous blend of pity and superiority. I mean, look at her life compared to mine. She's still alone, working a depressing job, living in that tiny apartment. Of course she can't stand to see me happy and successful. It must kill her to come to events like this and be reminded of everything she doesn't have. The laughter that followed this assessment was hearty and widespread. Multiple family members apparently found this analysis hilarious and accurate. My mother made a comment about how I'd probably die alone with 50 cats, and more laughter erupted that I stood there, still hidden, feeling something shift inside me. Not heartbreak, that would imply I'd had high enough expectations for them to break. Not surprise, I'd known on some level that they viewed me this way. What I felt was a cold, clear certainty that I was done. Done pretending this was a normal family. Done showing up for people who openly mocked me behind my back. Done investing emotional energy in relationships with people who wished I'd been in a car accident rather than attend their celebrations, but I wasn't going to just leave quietly. They wanted me not to show up. They thought I'd be too scared or wounded to confront them. They assumed I'd either not come or slink in quietly and tolerate their subtle dismissals and condescension. No. I was going to walk into that backyard, make my presence known, and let them sit with the knowledge that I'd heard every word they'd said. And then I was going to do something they'd never seen me do before. I was going to set boundaries so clear and firm that they'd never be able to pretend again that we had a functional family relationship. That I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and walked through the gate into the backyard. The party was in full swing, about 20 people scattered across Melissa's beautiful deck and manicured lawn, drinking wine and eating catered appetizers. My sister was holding court in the center of a group, showing off her new ring. My parents were near the outdoor kitchen, my father manning a grill. Various aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends were clustered in conversation groups that I walked straight through the middle of the party, making direct eye contact with anyone who noticed me. Several people did double takes. Clearly they hadn't expected me to actually show up, or they were processing the fact that I'd overheard their conversation. The talking gradually died down as more people noticed my presence and realized something was off about my demeanor. That I walked directly to the main table where gifts were being placed, set down my wine and cheese board, and then turned to face the assembled group. By now, everyone had noticed me and the yard had gone completely silent. "Thank you all for that fascinating conversation," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the yard without needing to shout. "I especially appreciated the part where you hoped I'd been in a car accident, Melissa. Really heartwarming sentiment from my only sister. And Mom, your comment about me dying alone with 50 cats was particularly creative. Very original humor." My mother's face went pale. My father looked frozen at the grill, tongs in hand. Melissa's expression cycled through shock, embarrassment, defiance, and calculation in rapid succession. "Jordan," my mother started, her voice weak. "No," I interrupted firmly. "You don't get to explain or justify or minimize what I just heard. You all stood here, at a party I was invited to, openly mocking me and expressing wishes that I'd been harmed in an accident so I wouldn't attend. That's not normal family dynamics. That's not just joking around. That's cruelty, and I'm done pretending it's anything else." "You're being dramatic," Melissa said, recovering her composure and defaulting to her usual defense, dismissing my feelings as overreaction. "We were just venting. Everyone complains about their family members sometimes. You're taking it too seriously." "Was I taking it too seriously when you said I'm jealous of your life and that it must kill me to see you happy? Was I being dramatic when Mom said I'd die alone with cats? Was I overreacting to the general consensus that I'm negative, exhausting, and a burden to be managed at family events?" Silence. Several family members who'd been part of the conversation looked down at their drinks, unable to meet my eyes. Others who apparently hadn't been involved in the conversation looked confused about what was happening. "You all made your feelings very clear," I continued, keeping my voice steady and calm. "You don't value my presence. You view me as a problem to be endured rather than a family member to be celebrated. You're embarrassed by my work and my life choices. You wish I wouldn't come to family events. So I'm going to make this very easy for you, I won't." "Jordan, don't be ridiculous," my father started. "I'm not being ridiculous. I'm being honest for the first time about what this family dynamic actually is. You've all been performing politeness to my face while expressing contempt behind my back. I'm just naming the reality you've already created. And I'm choosing to stop participating in it." I pulled an envelope from my bag, a card I'd brought for Melissa and Derek with a check inside for $500 as an engagement gift. I placed it on the gift table without opening it, without the sentiment I'd planned to write inside. "Congratulations on your engagement," I said to Melissa, my voice devoid of warmth. "I hope you have a beautiful life together. I genuinely do. But I won't be part of your celebration, today, or in the future. I won't be attending the wedding. I won't be at family gatherings going forward. I won't be the family punching bag you all use to feel better about yourselves by comparison. I'm done. You can't just cut off your entire family over one overheard conversation," my mother said, her voice rising with panic now that she was processing what I was actually saying. "Watch me," I replied simply. "You've shown me who you are and how you feel about me. I'm choosing to believe you and act accordingly. There's nothing else to discuss." I turned and started walking back toward the gate. Behind me, chaos erupted, my mother calling my name, my sister saying I was being ridiculous and ruining her party, various family members murmuring in confusion or concern. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, through the gate, to my car, away from people who'd proven they didn't deserve space in my life. As I pulled away from Melissa's house, my phone started buzzing with calls and texts. I turned it off, drove to a hotel, checked in for the night rather than attempting the 3-hour drive home while emotionally exhausted, and ordered room service, and then I sat in that hotel room and processed what had just happened. I just walked away from my entire family based on one overheard conversation. Was that an overreaction? Was I being too sensitive, too dramatic, too unwilling to forgive normal family dysfunction? But the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I'd made the right choice. That conversation wasn't an isolated incident, It was a window into how they really felt about me when they thought I couldn't hear. And what I'd heard was devastating in its casual cruelty and unanimous agreement. They didn't love me in any meaningful way. They tolerated me because social norms required it. They found me burdensome and embarrassing. They wished I wouldn't exist in their lives, so I was granting their wish. They'd wanted me not to show up at the party. I was going to not show up to anything ever again. Stay with me, because what happened over the next 6 months after I cut off my family is going to show you exactly why sometimes walking away is the healthiest choice you can make, and why the people who treated you badly will always try to rewrite the narrative to make themselves the victims when you finally set boundaries. The first week after the engagement party, my phone was bombarded with messages. I turned it back on once I got home from the hotel, and the notifications were overwhelming. 47 missed calls, 63 text messages, multiple voicemails, and even some social media messages from extended family members who'd apparently heard their version of what happened. I read through them systematically, documenting the patterns and themes. From my mother, multiple messages cycling through denial, bargaining, and blame. You misunderstood what you heard. We weren't being serious. You're overreacting. You're tearing this family apart. Please call me so we can fix this. Why are you being so stubborn? You've always been so difficult. This is just like you to make everything about yourself. From my father, shorter messages but with similar themes. Your mother is devastated. You need to apologize to Melissa for ruining her party. We raised you better than this. Call your mother. From Melissa, a progression from defensive to aggressive. You had no right to eavesdrop on a private conversation. You embarrassed me in front of my friends. Everyone thinks you're crazy now. Mom and Dad are so upset because of you. You're a terrible sister. If you don't apologize, don't bother ever contacting me again. From various extended family members, confusion, pressure to reconcile, and occasional support. Most assumed I'd had some kind of overreaction and needed to talk things out with the family. A few, interestingly, said things like, "Good for you for standing up for yourself," and "I'm sorry they treated you that way." I didn't respond to any of them immediately. Instead, I did something I'd been putting off for years. I called my therapist and scheduled an intensive therapy session to process what had happened and figure out how to move forward. Dr. Lisa Chen had been my therapist for 3 years, helping me manage work stress and anxiety. She knew about my family dynamics but had never pushed me to address them until I was ready. When I told her what had happened at the engagement party, her response was measured but telling. "Jordan, I'm not going to tell you whether walking away from your family was right or wrong. That's your decision to make. But I will say that what you described herein goes far beyond normal family conflict. That was systematic devaluation and expressed wish for harm. That's abuse, even if it's emotional and verbal rather than physical. And you have every right to protect yourself from abuse regardless of who's perpetrating it." "But they're my family," I said, echoing the objection I'd been hearing from everyone. "Isn't cutting off your entire family extreme? Is it extreme to remove yourself from a situation where people openly mock you, wish harm on you, and feel contempt for you?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "Or is it extreme that a family would treat one of its members that way in the first place? Jordan, you're not the one who created this situation. You're just the one who finally named it and refused to participate in it anymore. That's not extreme, that's self-preservation." Over the next several weeks of therapy, I worked through layers of guilt, grief, and liberation. Guilt that I'd abandoned my family. Grief over losing what I'd always hoped could be a real family connection someday. And liberation from the constant anxiety of trying to earn approval from people who decided long ago I wasn't worth approving of. Dr. Chen helped me understand that my family's reaction to my boundary setting was predictable. They'd spent decades with a dynamic where I was the difficult one and Melissa was the good one. My refusal to continue accepting that role threatened the entire family system, so they were all pressuring me to fall back in line and resume my assigned position. "The thing about family roles," Dr. Chen explained, "is that everyone benefits from them in some way, even the person in the negative role. You got to be the independent one, the rebel, the one who didn't need anyone. That came with pain, but it also came with a certain identity. Melissa got to be the successful one, the good daughter, but that came with pressure to always perform perfection. Your parents got to have one child they could be openly proud of while having another they could use as a cautionary tale. Breaking those roles threatens everyone's identity, so they'll fight to maintain the system even if it's toxic. So what do? I asked. You decide what kind of relationship, if any, you want with people who've demonstrated they'll treat you this way. And you set boundaries that protect your well-being, even if those boundaries make other people uncomfortable. I took her advice. I drafted a single, clear message that I sent to my mother, father, and Melissa. I need you all to understand why I left the engagement party and why I'm not interested in reconciling at this time. What I overheard at the party was not a one-time joke or harmless venting. It was a window into how you all genuinely feel about me, that I'm a burden, an embarrassment, someone whose absence would improve family gatherings. Multiple people agreed with these sentiments, which means this is not just Melissa's opinion but a shared family perspective. I've spent my entire life trying to earn acceptance and approval from a family that has made clear I don't meet your standards. I'm not the daughter or sister you wanted. My work isn't prestigious enough. My lifestyle isn't traditional enough. My personality isn't agreeable enough. I get it. Message received. What I won't do anymore is pretend this is normal or acceptable. I won't continue showing up to events where I'm merely tolerated. I won't invest emotional energy in relationships with people who speak about me with contempt when they think I can't hear. I'm not asking you to change or apologize or explain yourselves. I'm simply stating that I'm no longer available for this dynamic. If someday you want to build genuine, respectful relationships with me, I'm open to that possibility. But it would require acknowledgement of how I've been treated and demonstrated commitment to treating me differently. Until then, I need distance. I wish you all well. I hope Melissa's wedding is beautiful. But I won't be there, and I won't be at future family gatherings. This is not negotiable. Jordan, the responses to this message were predictable. My mother, you're being manipulative and dramatic. We've always loved you. Stop playing the victim. My father, you're destroying this family. Your mother is on anxiety medication because of you. Grow up. Melissa, glad we can finally be honest. You've always been jealous of me and now you're using this as an excuse to be spiteful. Don't come to my wedding. I don't want you there anyway. Getting married in 6 weeks. The invitation was addressed to me, formal and impersonal. There was no note, no personal message, nothing to indicate this was different from any other generic invitation she'd sent. I read these responses, showed them to Dr. Chin, and felt my decision solidify. These weren't people who were capable of self-reflection or genuine relationship repair. These were people who were angry that I'd stopped accepting mistreatment and who were doubling down on blame and manipulation rather than addressing their own behavior. I blocked all their numbers. I blocked them on social media. I set up email filters so their messages would go to a separate folder I could check if I chose to but wouldn't see automatically. I created space and silence where there had been constant pressure and noise. And then something remarkable happened. My life got better. Without the constant anxiety of managing family expectations and criticism, I had energy for other things. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try. I deepened friendships with people who actually valued me. I threw myself into my work with renewed focus, helping clients who were also dealing with toxic family situations and felt empowered by my own experience setting boundaries. I started dating someone I'd met through mutual friends, a kind, emotionally intelligent man named Marcus who, when I told him about my family situation, said simply, "Good for you for protecting yourself. Family who can't love you right doesn't deserve access to you." 3 months after the engagement party, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Melissa walked away without responding. 2 weeks later, my mother called from a number I didn't have blocked, apparently borrowed from a friend, and left a voicemail. "Jordan, it's Mom. I know you blocked our numbers but I'm hoping you'll listen to this. Melissa really wants you at her wedding. We all do. I know there's been conflict but this is your sister's wedding. Family shows up for family. Please reconsider your decision. We'll all be on our best behavior. You don't have to talk to anyone if you don't want to. Just be there for the ceremony. Please." The plea might have worked on old Jordan, the one who felt obligated to show up because family is family, regardless of how family treated me. But new Jordan, the one who'd spent 3 months experiencing what life was like without constant criticism and rejection, wasn't interested. I didn't respond to the voicemail. The wedding happened without me. I spent that day volunteering at a women's shelter, helping survivors of domestic violence plan their safety strategies and build new lives separate from abusive partners. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was literally helping people leave toxic family situations on the same day my family expected me to come back to mine. After the wedding, the messages picked up again. You're a terrible person for missing your sister's wedding. Everyone asked where you were and we had to lie and say you were sick because we were too embarrassed to admit you're just vindictive. You've made your choice, don't expect us to be there for you when you need family someday. I documented all of it but didn't respond. Dr. Chen had warned me that they'd escalate their attempts to manipulate me back into the family system, and she was right. But she'd also reassured me that holding firm to my boundaries would eventually lead them to either give up or actually reconsider their behavior. 6 months after the engagement party, I received a letter in the mail from my mother. Not an email, not a text, but a handwritten letter on nice stationery, 3 pages long. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity won out. The letter surprised me. It wasn't full of blame or manipulation or demands that I apologize. Instead, it was, or claimed to be, reflective. Dear Jordan, I've spent the past 6 months thinking about what you said and what you overheard at Melissa's party. I've been in therapy trying to understand how we got to this point and what my role has been in the family dynamics that hurt you. I need you to know some things. First, you were right about many things. I did favor Melissa over you. Not consciously or maliciously, but I did it nonetheless. You were always so independent and capable that I convinced myself you didn't need my support the way Melissa did. But independence shouldn't be punished with neglect, and capability shouldn't mean someone doesn't deserve celebration. I failed you as a mother in fundamental ways. Second, the conversation you overheard was cruel and wrong. There's no excuse for it. Saying we were just venting or joking doesn't make it acceptable. We were talking about you with contempt and cruelty, and you had every right to be hurt and angry. I'm ashamed of my participation in that conversation. Third, I don't blame you for leaving and setting boundaries. You protected yourself from a toxic situation, and that was the healthy choice. I'm sorry that you had to make that choice. I'm sorry that your own family created circumstances where the healthiest option was to cut us off. I'm not asking you to forgive me or reconcile with the family. I'm not asking for anything except that you know I'm working on understanding my failures and trying to be better. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. If you never want to talk to me again, I understand that too. I love you, Jordan. I've always loved you. I just did a terrible job of showing it in ways that mattered or that you could feel. And I'm sorry for that. Mom, I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation or hidden agenda. It seemed sincere, but I'd been manipulated by my family before. I brought it to therapy to process with Dr. Chin. What do you think? She asked after reading it. Does it feel genuine to you? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to believe she's actually done the work and understands what went wrong. Part of me thinks this is just a more sophisticated manipulation to get me to come back so things can return to how they were. Those are both valid possibilities, Dr. Chen agreed. The question is, what do you want to do with this letter? You don't owe your mother a response regardless of whether it's genuine. But you get to decide if you want to engage or not based on what serves your well-being. I thought about it for a week. And then I wrote back, 1 page, clear and boundaried. Mom, thank you for your letter. I appreciate the accountability in it, and I hope your therapy is helping you understand these patterns. I'm not ready to reconcile or rebuild a relationship. The hurt is still too fresh, and I don't trust that fundamental dynamics have actually changed versus you just learning to express things differently. But I'm willing to stay open to the possibility of future contact if you continue doing the work you're describing. What I need you to understand is that I'm happy now. My life without the family is peaceful and fulfilling. I'm not sitting around devastated that you cut me off or waiting for you all to welcome me back. I've built a good life that doesn't include you, and that's okay. If we're ever going to have a relationship again, it will be because it adds value to my life, not because I need it to feel complete. Jordan, I sent the letter and waited to see what would happen next. Because the truth was, I didn't know if my mother's words represented real change or just temporary guilt. Only time would tell. But what I did know was that I'd survived walking away from my family. More than survived, I'd thrived. And whatever happened going forward, I wasn't going back to being the family scapegoat who accepted contempt disguised as love. If you're still watching, you want to know what happened next with my family, whether my mother's words were real, whether the boundaries I set held, and whether it's possible to build new relationships with people who've hurt you deeply. Stay tuned, because the next year brought surprises I never anticipated. My mother's letters sat in my family folder, a physical file box where I kept all correspondence from them, documenting the evolution of our relationship breakdown in case I ever needed evidence of what had actually happened. I'd learned from my work with domestic violence survivors that documentation was crucial, that people would often try to rewrite history and gaslight you about what had been said or done, and that having records protected you from that manipulation. 3 weeks after I'd sent my response to my mother, I received another letter from her. This one was shorter, less emotional, more practical. Jordan, I understand you're not ready to rebuild a relationship, and I respect that. I'm not going to pressure you or repeatedly reach out. I just wanted you to know that I'm continuing therapy and working on understanding my role in our family dysfunction. I've also started having conversations with your father and Melissa about the patterns we've created. Those conversations are difficult. And not always productive, but I'm trying. Your father is resistant to the idea that we did anything wrong. Melissa is defensive and thinks you're overreacting. But I'm continuing to push the issue because you were right about the problems even if they don't want to acknowledge it yet. I hope your life continues to be peaceful and fulfilling. You deserve that. Mom, this letter felt different, less about trying to draw me back into the family and more about my mother doing her own work regardless of whether I responded. I filed it away without replying. Not because I was trying to punish her, but because I wasn't ready to engage and I didn't want to give her false hope that one letter would fix years of damage. 4 months after the engagement party, something unexpected happened. I received a message from my cousin Rachel, my Aunt Sarah's daughter, who'd been at the engagement party but hadn't participated in the cruel conversation I'd overheard. Hey Jordan, I know we haven't talked in years but I wanted to reach out. I was at Melissa's party and I heard some of what happened. I'm sorry you had to experience that. I know I didn't say anything at the time and I should have. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family agrees with how you were treated. Some of us have been thinking a lot about family dynamics and patterns since you left. Would you be willing to get coffee sometime? No pressure, just an offer to talk if you want to. I stared at this message for a long time. Rachel and I had been close as children but had drifted apart as adults, partly because she lived several states away, partly because family gatherings were uncomfortable for me and I'd stopped attending most of them. We hadn't spoken in at least 5 years. I showed the message to Dr. Chin in our next session. What do you think? She asked. Does it feel genuine or like another way for the family to try to pull you back in? I think it's genuine, I said slowly. Rachel was never part of the core dysfunction. She's always been more independent from the family system. But I'm also nervous about engaging with anyone connected to my family because I don't want to get pulled back into the drama. That's a valid concern, Dr. Chin acknowledged. But it's also worth considering that cutting off from your entire extended family because of how your immediate family treated you might mean losing potential relationships that could actually be healthy. Only you can decide if reaching out to Rachel is worth the risk. I decided it was worth the risk. I responded to Rachel's message and we agreed to meet for coffee the following weekend. I was nervous driving to the coffee shop, unsure what to expect, wondering if this was a setup or an ambush. It wasn't. Rachel hugged me when I arrived, and we sat down with our drinks and had the most honest conversation I'd had with any family member in years. I need to apologize, Rachel started. I was at that party and I heard what they were saying about you. I didn't participate but I also didn't defend you or tell them to stop. I just stood there uncomfortable and let it happen. That was cowardly and I'm sorry. Why didn't you say something? I asked, not accusatory but genuinely curious. Honestly. Because that's the family pattern. We all know that your mom and dad favor Melissa and that they treat you differently, but nobody talks about it. It's like this collective agreement that we'll all pretend it's normal and fine. And when you're not around, they're even more open about dismissing you and making jokes at your expense. It's become accepted family behavior. Does anyone ever push back on it? Rarely. My mom, your Aunt Sarah, has made comments occasionally about how your parents are too hard on you, but they just shut her down by saying she doesn't understand or that you're difficult and they're doing their best. And then everyone drops it because confronting your parents about their behavior is uncomfortable. So everyone just lets it happen. Yes. And I'm ashamed of that. After you walked out of that party, there was this moment where people were uncomfortable, like maybe they'd been caught doing something wrong. But then your mom and Melissa started controlling the narrative, saying you'd overreacted, that you were too sensitive, that you'd always been dramatic and this was just another example. And people accepted that narrative because it was easier than admitting they'd all participated in something cruel. I felt validated hearing this confirmation of what I'd suspected, that my family had immediately rewritten the story to make me the villain rather than acknowledging their own behavior. So why are you reaching out now? I asked. Rachel took a breath. Because after that party, I started thinking about my own family dynamics and patterns. My mom is your mom's sister, right? And I started noticing how similar some of the patterns are in our family, the favoritism, the scapegoating, the refusal to acknowledge problems. I'm in therapy now too, working through some of this stuff. And I realized that I'd watched you get treated badly for years and never said anything, and that made me complicit. I wanted to reach out and say, I see you. I see what happened. You weren't wrong to leave. We talked for 3 hours that day, sharing stories about our experiences with family dysfunction, discussing our therapy journeys, comparing notes on patterns we'd noticed. Rachel told me that several other cousins had privately expressed discomfort with how I'd been treated over the years but had never spoken up. She said my walking out of the engagement party had created a crack in the family's collective denial, and some people were starting to question whether the official narrative about me being difficult and dramatic was actually accurate. There's a group of us, younger generation, mostly, who are reassessing a lot of family patterns, Rachel explained. After you left, we started talking among ourselves about what we'd witnessed over the years. How your accomplishments were never celebrated the way Melissa's were. How your career helping domestic violence survivors was dismissed as depressing, while Melissa's decision to quit working entirely was praised as focusing on family. How you were always blamed for being sensitive when really the family was being insensitive. Some of us are realizing we've been part of perpetuating toxic dynamics. This conversation with Rachel opened up a new possibility I hadn't considered, that I could have relationships with some family members without reconciling with my parents or sister. That the family wasn't a monolithic unit that I had to accept or reject entirely, but rather a collection of individuals with whom I could have separate relationships. Over the next several months, I reconnected with Rachel and 2 other cousins who reached out after hearing about our coffee meeting. We formed our own little support system, sharing experiences and supporting each other in setting boundaries with toxic family members. It was healing in ways I hadn't expected, having family members who validated my experience rather than dismissing it. 8 months after the engagement party, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Jordan. It's Dad. My father's voice was heavy, tired in a way I'd never heard before. I almost hung up immediately. I'd blocked his number and wasn't interested in engaging with him. But curiosity made me stay on the line. How did you get this number? I asked. Rachel gave it to me. I asked her to pass along a message that I wanted to talk to you, and she said she'd give you my new number and you could decide whether to call. You didn't call, so I'm calling you. Please don't hang up. I have 60 seconds, I said. What do you want? I want to apologize. Really apologize, not the defensive non-apologies I gave you before. Jordan, I've been in therapy for the past 2 months at your mother's insistence. And I'm starting to see things I didn't want to see about how I treated you compared to how I treated Melissa. I'm starting to understand that I did favor her, that I did dismiss you, that I participated in creating an environment where you were undervalued and disrespected. And I'm sorry. I was silent, processing this. My father had always been the most defensive about family issues, the most resistant to acknowledging problems. Hearing him actually admit fault was unprecedented. "Are you just saying this because Mom told you to?" I asked. "She encouraged me to call, yes. But Jordan, I'm saying it because I'm finally understanding it. My therapist made me do this exercise where I had to list times I'd celebrated your achievements versus times I'd celebrated Melissa's. The list for Melissa was pages long. The list for you," his voice broke, "I couldn't even fill one page. And that made me sick. You deserved a father who was proud of you and showed it. You got a father who took you for granted and assumed you didn't need support because you were so capable of managing on your own." "Capability doesn't mean someone doesn't need love and support," I said, echoing words Dr. Chin had told me. "I know that now. I didn't know it then, or I knew it but didn't apply it to you. Jordan, I failed you as a father. I let your mother set the tone for how we treated our daughters, and that tone was deeply unfair to you. I participated in mocking you at that party. I blamed you for walking out instead of examining why you'd felt you needed to. I've spent 8 months defending my own behavior instead of acknowledging I was wrong. I'm ashamed of all of it. What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing you're not willing to give. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or reconciliation. I'm just asking that you know I'm working on this. I'm trying to be better, even though it's late and it can't undo the damage I did. And if you ever want to talk or try to rebuild something, I'm here. But if you don't, I understand that too." We talked for another 20 minutes. It wasn't a magic fix-everything conversation, but it was more honest than any conversation I'd had with my father in years. He asked about my life and actually listened to the answers. He asked about my work and expressed genuine interest rather than changing the subject. He told me he was proud of me for setting boundaries and protecting myself, even though it meant protecting myself from him. After the call ended, I sat with my phone in my hand, feeling confused and cautious and slightly hopeful. Was this real change or temporary performance? Only time would tell. 1 year after the engagement party, I received a group message from my mother. She'd created a group chat with me, my father, and Melissa, and sent a single message: "I've asked everyone to read this with open minds. We've all been in family therapy together for the past 3 months working on our dynamics. I wanted to share what we've been learning and what we're committed to changing. Jordan, I know you might not believe us or trust us, and that's okay. But we needed to say this anyway." There was an attached document, a 4-page letter signed by all 3 of them, outlining specific ways they'd failed me, specific patterns they'd created, and specific changes they were committed to making. It acknowledged the conversation I'd overheard at the engagement party, acknowledged years of favoritism and dismissal, acknowledged that I'd been right to protect myself by leaving. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't demand reconciliation. It just said, "We see what we did. We're sorry. We're working on being better people whether or not you're ever part of our lives again." I read the document 3 times, looking for manipulation or false promises. It seemed genuine, but I remained cautious. I showed it to Dr. Chin, who said, "This is more accountability than most families ever manage. The question is whether you want to engage with their attempts to change or if the damage is too deep for repair." "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe them and try to rebuild something. Part of me thinks it's too little too late and that the relationships are too damaged to salvage. Part of me is just tired of thinking about all of this and wants to keep living my peaceful life without them." "All of those feelings are valid," Dr. Chin said. "You don't have to decide right now. You can take your time figuring out what you want." So that's what I did. I took my time. And what I ultimately decided would determine whether my family got any space in my future or whether the boundaries I'd set a year earlier would remain permanent. I didn't respond to my family's group message immediately. Instead, I did what had become my pattern over the past year. I filed the document away, processed my reaction with Dr. Chin, talked through my options with trusted friends and my cousin Rachel, and took my time deciding what I actually wanted. Marcus, who I'd been dating for 6 months by this point, had a perspective that surprised me. "You know what I think," he said one evening as we discussed the family therapy document. "I think you're afraid that if you let them back in, you'll lose the peace you found. And that's understandable. You worked hard to build this good life without them. But Jordan, you're not the same person you were a year ago. You're not going to fall back into old patterns just because you allow limited contact with family members who've done the work to change. You're too strong for that now. He was right. The Jordan from a year ago had been conflict avoidant, desperate for family approval, willing to tolerate mistreatment rather than rock the boat. The current Jordan had clear boundaries, strong self-worth, and no need for external validation. If I chose to engage with my family again, it would be from a position of strength, not weakness. 2 weeks after receiving the family therapy document, I sent a response to the group chat. I've read what you sent and I appreciate the work you're describing. I can see that you've engaged with these issues more seriously than I expected, and I acknowledge that's meaningful. However, acknowledgement of past harm doesn't automatically create trust or repair damage. I need to see sustained change over time before I'm willing to rebuild relationships. Here's what I'm willing to offer. I'm open to occasional, structured contact with each of you individually, not as a family unit yet, but as separate people who want to build new relationships with me. This means 1. Monthly phone calls or coffee meetings, if both parties want them to. Clear boundaries that get respected without argument or guilt. 3. No discussing other family members or trying to pressure me to reconcile with everyone at once. 4. Acknowledgement that I will pull back if I see old patterns resurging. This is not forgiveness. This is not reconciliation. This is me offering the possibility of building something new if you're all truly committed to being different people than you were a year ago. If that's not enough for you, I understand. But it's what I'm able to offer right now. Jordan, the responses came separately. From my mother, thank you for being willing to try. I know I don't deserve this chance, but I'm grateful for it. I'd like to take you up on monthly coffee if you're open to it. From my father, I appreciate your willingness to consider this. I'd also like regular contact if you're comfortable with that. And Jordan, I respect your boundaries completely. I won't push for more than you're willing to give. From Melissa, this feels pretty cold and formal for family, but I guess that's where we are now. I'm willing to try if you are. Melissa's response was the most resistant, the most defensive, evidence that while she might have participated in family therapy, she hadn't fully bought into the work the way my parents apparently had. I noted that and filed it away as information about how much I could realistically expect from her. Over the next 6 months, I rebuilt relationships with my parents slowly and carefully. Monthly coffee with my mother where we talked about neutral topics at first, gradually moving into more substantial conversations about family patterns and her therapy work. Monthly phone calls with my father that started awkwardly but gradually became easier as he learned to actually listen instead of lecturing or dismissing. Were they perfect? No. Did old patterns sometimes resurface? Yes. But the crucial difference was that when those patterns appeared, I named them immediately and they actually acknowledged and corrected course instead of getting defensive or blaming me for being sensitive. My mother still sometimes slipped into comparisons between me and Melissa, but when I pointed it out, she apologized and caught herself. My father still occasionally minimized my feelings, but when I called him on it, he'd stop and actually work to understand my perspective instead of dismissing it. Melissa was harder. Our monthly calls were stilted and uncomfortable, full of long silences and surface-level conversation. She apologized for the engagement party incident but in a way that felt more like checking a box than genuine remorse. She struggled to understand why I couldn't just move past it, now that everyone had apologized. 9 months after I'd started limited contact with my family, Melissa called me on a day that wasn't our scheduled monthly call. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Jordan, I need to talk to you about something. Her voice sounded different, smaller, uncertain in ways I'd never heard from my usually confident sister. Okay, what's going on? Derek and I are getting divorced. She said it flatly, without emotion. He's been having an affair with someone from his office for the past year. He wants to marry her. The divorce is happening whether I want it or not. I was silent for a moment, processing this information and trying to figure out how to respond. The petty part of me wanted to say something about karma or point out that maybe her perfect life wasn't as perfect as everyone had thought. But Melissa sounded genuinely devastated, and I wasn't cruel enough to kick someone when they were down regardless of our history. I'm sorry you're going through that, I said finally. That's a huge betrayal. How are you holding up? I don't know. Jordan, her voice broke. I think I'm starting to understand some things. About how I've lived my life, about the choices I've made, about the person I've been. Going through this divorce, I'm realizing that I built my entire identity around being Derek's wife and the good daughter, who did everything right. And now Derek doesn't want to be married to me, and I'm looking at my life and realizing I don't know who I am outside of those roles. This was the most vulnerable I'd ever heard Melissa sound. The most honest. The most like an actual human being with depth rather than a performance of perfection. I'm realizing, she continued, that I've been cruel to you over the years. Not just at the engagement party but for our whole lives. I always got to be the favorite, the one who did everything right, the one mom and dad were proud of. And I used that position to make you feel less than me. I convinced myself it was because I'd earned it through good behavior, but really, I was just benefiting from a toxic dynamic that wasn't fair to you. Yes, I agreed simply. That's accurate. I'm sorry. Really, genuinely sorry. Not because mom and dad are making me say it or because family. Therapy told me I should. But because going through my own life crisis has made me empathize with what you must have felt dealing with family judgment and rejection. And I'm sorry I was part of creating that experience for you. We talked for over an hour. Melissa told me about her marriage ending, about how Derek had been emotionally checked out for years but she'd ignored it because acknowledging problems would mean admitting her perfect life wasn't perfect. She told me about her own therapy journey and what she was learning about people-pleasing and external validation. She asked me questions about how I'd built my life after cutting off the family, how I'd found peace in being myself rather than performing for approval. It wasn't a magic reconciliation where everything was suddenly fixed between us. But it was a start, the first genuine conversation we'd had in possibly our entire lives, where Melissa dropped her performance and I saw the insecure, struggling human being underneath the polished exterior. Over the following year, my relationships with my parents and Melissa continued to evolve. Slowly, carefully, with setbacks and progress and moments of genuine connection mixed with moments of frustration and old patterns resurfacing. Family therapy continued. Individual therapy continued. And gradually, we built something that resembled actual family relationships rather than the toxic dynamic we'd had before. Did I ever fully trust them the way I would have if they'd been consistently good family members from the beginning? No. There was always a part of me that remained alert for signs of backsliding, always a boundary in place to protect myself. But I learned to hold both things at once, appreciation for their genuine efforts to change, and awareness that relapse into old patterns was always possible. 2 years after the engagement party, I attended Melissa's birthday dinner at my parents' house, the first family gathering I'd been to since walking out of her engagement party. I was nervous driving there, unsure what to expect, ready to leave if it became uncomfortable. But it was fine. Good, even. My mother had prepared food I actually liked instead of just Melissa's favorites. My father asked about my work and actually listened to my responses with genuine interest. Melissa was more relaxed and authentic than I'd seen her in years, making self-deprecating jokes about her divorce and her journey to figure out who she was outside of being someone's wife. At one point during the evening, my mother pulled me aside privately. "I want you to know something," she said. What happened at Melissa's engagement party 2 years ago, hearing that conversation, walking away, setting those boundaries, that was the best thing that could have happened to this family. I mean that sincerely. You forced us to confront patterns we'd been ignoring for decades. You refused to accept mistreatment, which made us realize we'd been treating you mistreatably. Everything good that's happened in this family since then, the therapy, the growth, the honest conversations, came from you standing up and saying no more. So thank you for being strong enough to do that. I felt tears forming. I didn't do it to fix the family. I did it to protect myself. I know. But sometimes protecting yourself has the side effect of forcing other people to grow. You taught us that we couldn't keep treating people badly and expect them to tolerate it forever. That's a valuable lesson even if it was painful to learn. Looking around that dinner table, at my father actually engaging with me as a person rather than dismissing me, at Melissa being vulnerable about her struggles rather than performing perfection, at my mother actively working to treat us equally rather than favoring one daughter, I felt something I hadn't felt with my family in years: hope. Not hope that we'd have a perfect family with no problems, but hope that we could have an honest family that acknowledged problems and worked on them. 3 years after the engagement party, I got married to Marcus. My family attended the wedding, not in positions of honor like they might have been if our relationships hadn't been fractured and rebuilt, but as guests who'd earned their invitation through years of demonstrated change. Melissa was there with her new boyfriend, looking genuinely happy for me in a way she never would have been capable of before her own life upheaval. My parents cried during the ceremony, and when my mother hugged me afterward, she whispered, "Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you've become." My grandmother, my mother's mother, had died the year before I'd walked out of Melissa's engagement party. She'd been one of the few family members who'd consistently seen and valued me, who'd encouraged my work and praised my independence. I'd often wondered what she would think of my decision to cut off the family, whether she'd approve or be disappointed. Grandma would have told me to protect myself first and let everyone else figure out their own reactions, I replied to my mother. She was the one who taught me that loving yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. She did teach you that, my mother agreed. And I failed to reinforce those lessons. But Jordan, you learned them anyway, even without family support. You became exactly who you needed to be, despite us rather than because of us. That's remarkable. Looking around my wedding reception, at my found family of friends and colleagues, at my husband who loved me without conditions, at my biological family who'd done the hard work of change, I felt at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I'd learned to protect myself, set boundaries, and build a life that honored my worth regardless of who validated it. The engagement party where I'd overheard my family wishing I'd been in an accident had been devastating in the moment. But it had also been clarifying, a moment of truth that cut through years of denial about how dysfunctional my family relationships were. Walking away from that party had been the scariest and healthiest thing I'd done. And rebuilding relationships on my terms, with clear boundaries and genuine accountability from them, had been a gift I'd given myself by refusing to accept less than I deserved. If you've made it to the end of this story, here's what I want you to know. Sometimes the people who should love you best are the people who hurt you most. Sometimes family is toxic not because they're evil, but because they're operating from broken patterns they haven't examined. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away and let the truth of your absence teach them what they should have learned when you were present. You don't owe anyone access to you just because you share DNA. You don't owe anyone forgiveness just because they apologize. You don't owe anyone reconciliation just because they want it. What you owe yourself is protection, self-respect, and relationships that honor your worth. My family got a second chance because they did years of work to earn it: therapy, accountability, demonstrated behavior change, respect for my boundaries. Many families don't do that work. Many families expect you to come back without changing anything, to forgive without earning it, to resume relationships that were harmful because family is family. Don't accept that. You deserve better. Walk away if you need to. Set boundaries that protect you. Build found family with people who actually value you. And if biological family eventually does the work to deserve a place in your life, you can make that choice from a position of strength rather than obligation. 3 years after walking out of my sister's engagement party, I'm happier than I've ever been. My family relationships are real now rather than performative. My life is full of people who love me genuinely. And I know without question that I can protect myself when needed because I've already done it once. That's the real victory, not that my family changed, though they did, but that I learned I could survive and thrive without them if necessary. That's power. That's freedom. That's self-love. Thanks for listening to my story. Drop a comment if you've ever had to walk away from toxic family dynamics or set boundaries that people said were too harsh. You're not alone in this. And you're not wrong to protect yourself. Subscribe for more stories about choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and building lives that honor your worth. You deserve a family, biological or chosen, who treats you with respect and love. Don't settle for less.